Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, I'm always appreciative that at the beginning of each new month, NOAA goes back and kind of synthesizes the data from the previous month and puts it on the 125-year rank of data that we have for weather across the United States. So on the left, you're looking here at the national average temperature rank, and on the right, you have the national precipitation rank. Now, across the whole country put together, we rank 21st. So this was certainly a month, the month of October, that was sitting here in the much below average or below average category. But when you look at precipitation, very wet. But we need to understand how different it was across the United States. We can break this down state by state, and you can really see that we were split across the country, with the Pacific Northwest seeing their temperatures giving them a top 10, in fact, a top 5 coldest October on record, with Idaho setting its new all-time coldest, whereas parts of the Southeast very, very warm. Look at Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina there having their top 2 or 3 warmest on record. When you think about statewide precipitation ranks, you can almost just cut it east-west right along the Continental Divide, with the western United States being exceptionally dry. You can see there California ranking 10th driest, where Mississippi having its wettest year on record. And I'm going to be honest, this was a pattern in October that I really struggled with. I thought when I was doing my long-range projections back in September that maybe the pattern we're in now at the beginning of November, I anticipated arriving a few weeks ago. And it was certainly a pattern that persistence won out and made it a very challenging month for me to do some weather forecasting. What really got me was this. What we're looking at here is when we go back to the month of October, what did the general flow of the atmosphere look like? Well, it featured a large ridge moving up into the Gulf of Alaska that dipped into this deep trough here. But the piece that I really struggled with was understanding the strength of the big ridge that sat over parts of Greenland. You see, had that ridge been weaker, we would have allowed this trough to progress quite a bit farther to the east, and that would have brought the drier weather with it. I thought that with the big positive phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, plus what was going on in the Indian Ocean, we would take the ridge that you see here and also shove it farther to the east as well. So this was just a pattern where I learned some valuable lessons in the power of blocking in the high latitudes. Now, at our current kind of flow pattern, things are finally progressed and they've changed. And now the blocking is really shoved here over the western United States. You see we have a strong branch, almost zonal here, of the Pacific jet stream sweeping across the mid part of the Pacific, but it is certainly blocked up into this high over low pattern before things kind of come right back together, with the polar jet dip south around some very cold air here, and the subtropical jet meets it right in through this area. And it says, I love looking at these animations because this just comes down to the fundamental of meteorology. And what I mean by that is, what causes the winds to be fast in the jet stream is always a consequence, in the mid-latitudes, it's always a consequence of the strength of the low-level temperature gradient. Now, what does that mean? That means we find the fastest winds in the jet stream on top of our strongest fronts at the surface. And this fast pocket of winds that you see right here, we'll look below it at the surface. Here's the surface winds. You can see that right in through this corridor, we have a high-pressure cell sitting here, sending its wind out, racing toward the south. And we're feeding this with moisture on the south side like this. And that frontal boundary aloft is where you have your fastest jet stream winds. And that's why fronts are focal points for adverse weather, because they are the culmination of several different things in the atmosphere basically making air rise. So when we take a look at this, where that front is currently positioned on the back side of it, we're anywhere between 10 and almost 30 degrees colder than yesterday. So we've got some very, very cold air that is coming in behind this. And you can just see I grabbed this off at 3:15 this morning when I was kind of compiling my notes for today. Look at some of the temperatures, single digits in the north central plains. And right there along that boundary, very quickly we are advancing this colder air to the south because of the dominance of this high pressure cell that is sitting here. So as this front continues to progress and we run that moisture over the top of it, we're going to see the potential for some very heavy rainfall into the area I just circled there today as the front moves south. Now, as it did come through, just taking a look at the last 72 hours of total accumulated snowfall here, we can see that the narrow band that stretched from parts of Montana but through South Dakota over towards southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, and then into southern Wisconsin, in some locations did put down some pretty heavy snowfall amounts. We knew that the probability of getting over 3 inches in that corridor was relatively high, and we certainly saw that in the long run. And on radar, we can see that snow yesterday spreading through parts of northern Iowa, southern Wisconsin, but in early morning hours this morning, we can see right in through this corridor where the heavy rain is beginning to really take shape. But you just saw how much cold air was sneaking in on the back side of this. And so I just want to alert you to a couple of things here. Looking at our all hazards weather map, we have winter weather advisories out on the kind of upslope part of Colorado getting into the front range of the Rocky Mountains. Same thing for New Mexico. We already have a broad area of flood watches out for this corridor in through here. But I want to take you into the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas because early this morning the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center actually increased the probability of having some freezing rain as the colder air just tucks in underneath the warmer air aloft, which means the raindrops as they fall through that layer can supercool and freeze on contact with the ground. Now let's take a look at it here from our high resolution NAM model. Overnight hours through about 6 a.m. Here you go. So you can already see the influence of that colder air coming in. This pink color that I use here indicates the changeover to freezing rain. But heavy rain along this corridor throughout much of the mid-morning hours this morning. By the time we get to noon, it seems to have cleared out of southern Illinois, really out of the Ohio River here, and it's now moving through Tennessee, but stretching back again into north central Texas. Now the broader shield of precipitation now moves up into, again, this is by midday on Thursday, into the northeast. And we'll have enough cold air that the rain-snow line appears to be dividing the northeast right in through here with lighter snow on the back side of this. You can see the influence of the high-pressure cell. Remember, the flow around a high-pressure cell is clockwise. So it's taking those winds across the Great Lakes, and we're getting lake-effect snow showers here today. But as we progress into the late afternoon and evening hours, now we can really see the lake-effect snow bands taking shape, and the main frontal boundary is already, by the time we get to 1 a.m. on Friday, pushed itself deep into the southeast, and the colder air behind it is sitting in this high-pressure cell. And this is just the first of a few big shots at colder air. Now that boundary is going to stall right in through here as we get into the midday on Friday. And you can see that that's going to give another round of rainfall right here along the Gulf Coast. Meanwhile, coming back through the north central plains, we have another little clipper that sneaks through there, bringing in some chances for snow for parts of North Dakota, but then getting into northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and the UP and Michigan. So that's what things look like through early in the morning on Saturday. Just looking at some precipitation totals here for that region that has the heaviest rainfall over the next couple of days here. We can see that if we just look over the next 5 days, total accumulated precipitation will be between 1 and maybe up to upwards of 2.5 inches of rainfall within this corridor here. And again, that is slowly pushing to the southeast, but rainfall amounts as the front really gets moving are less because of it. So let's take a look at where this pattern goes by switching over to the European model here. So we've already talked about it to this point. This is now Friday evening, high pressure that is in control. We can see colder air here. Now our next system is coming out at this point on Saturday evening, moving through the Great Lakes states. And as we move forward in this forecast, we'll see our next big dome of high pressure already starting to take shape here in the Canadian prairies by Sunday afternoon. Now, already at this point, at 90 hours out in the forecast for Sunday afternoon, there's a bit of model discrepancy over the position and strength of this low that you see here, and also the timing of the front that comes sweeping in at this point. You see, this is Monday morning, and what we've got here is we've got higher atmospheric pressure sitting in this area and a low sitting here. So now what's going on is the flow of the atmosphere is doing something a bit more like this around the low, and it's coming around like this on the high. So we've got all this colder air in place in this area with the warmer air to the south of it. And the trick with forecasting early next week will be to understand where that rain-snow boundary is going to be. And as this particular pattern continues to press forward, let's just see what the model is currently calling for. This is Monday afternoon, getting into Monday evening. Now at this point, with the colder that is in this high, we will have enough cold air here to be bringing in some snow showers in this area. But look at the strength of the winds as this comes in. Look at how tightly spaced these isobars are. Coming down here into central Texas, extremely windy conditions. Now the question will be that by the time we get to Tuesday morning, are we really going to be able to get enough cold air in place to be bringing snow to Tennessee and Kentucky? Maybe even stretching back into this area? Because this might be one of the more challenging places in the country to forecast snowfall right in through this area. But we can see very windy conditions because the strength of that high right now is a 1044 high, so that's 1044 millibars. That's a big one. Now, to further complicate things, Tuesday morning, we will have to watch to see where this particular low pressure system will be sitting. Will it really be over parts of Massachusetts and Connecticut, or will it be much farther to the east at this time? Because that will tell us how much snow we can anticipate here in the northeastern part of the U.S. But one thing is for sure, that high that squeezes in there clears everything out by the time we get out to late Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. And that system that was over the northeast has blasted on through, and it will be cold and very windy here in the midsection of the country at that point. Now, with this big high that is coming through, we may finally, by the end of next week, be bringing in more moisture here into the Pacific Northwest, at least a shot of it coming through after an incredibly dry time period. But honestly, I'm not seeing too much in the way of getting a lot of precipitation in at that time. So let's just take a look now at the next week in terms of total accumulated precipitation, GFS on the left and European model on the right. We see a very similar story overall with this, and why we see the GFS is a little bit drier in this is because of its position of the upper level trough that is sitting in this area, advancing much farther to the east quicker. Now, overall, a lot of this is going to be coming in the form of some lighter snowfall amounts. So if we just take a look at our probability through the next week of grabbing another 3 inches of snowfall, we can see that it's going to be a lot of lake effect. It's going to be with that system squeaking through here, bringing in some bigger snowfall totals for, again, that dividing line seemed to be right in through here. And with the next system coming down as it pushes against, the Rocky Mountains here, some bigger snowfall amounts, higher probability, I should say, of getting at least 3 inches in this corridor. Beyond that, pinning down the snowfall amounts is going to be very challenging. So what you see in this area is a lot of snow showers in that previous animation, okay? Just want to make sure that that's clear. Looking at exclusively at week 2, I have the GFS here, the European on this side. Because of the dominance of these big highs that keep coming down through this area, that's a lot of drier air. And overall, we do see that week 2 continues to paint a drier picture, not only for the Pacific Northwest, but also in this corridor. But like I said, we did see some precip coming into the Pacific Northwest, just not ubiquitous and covering everything, and it's certainly not getting into California anytime soon. Now, with the depth of that trough sitting here, we're going to watch the East Coast very carefully for some larger storm systems. Very tricky forecast for week 2 in that regard. But what I do notice is, as I play this out, we keep seeing the continual reinforcement of that western ridge as we move through the middle part of the month of November. You can really see it pretty well established here as deeper troughs keep sweeping in through this area. Now, this will be the tricky one. Tuesday, the 12th, we'll need to see if the position of this low is here. If this upper level trough was just back 500, 600, 700 miles in this area, we would have a massive nor'easter running up the East Coast. But it's more progressive, a little bit farther to the east, which means I think the majority of the adverse weather is going to be off the coast. One thing I want to point out, now I realize I'm way at the end of an ensemble run here. I would love it for the model to get this right, because if it is correct here by the 22nd of the month, and we have a deeper trough that is now coming over the Aleutian Islands with a ridging underneath it, this will give us a very strong Pacific jet that could break out that block that's sitting here over the western United States. A lot is up in the air to see if that's going to happen. So we know this, our temperatures are going to plummet here. We are nowhere near done with single-digit temperatures in the central United States. This is just your next 5 days, GFS on the left, European on the right. Here's days 6 through 10, bitterly cold air coming in with that second trough next week while the west is warming up. And when we get out there, days 11 to 15, but the major difference that I can see is that the European's a bit farther along to the east with the warmer weather than the GFS is at this particular point. But now we're talking about all the way out to the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, that time period here in the forecast. What's complicating this? Let's look at some bigger picture things here. I'm going to animate over on the right the current position of the polar vortex. And what I just want to note here is that it is elongated like this, and the cold air is tucked into Canada and it is tucked into Russia and Siberia. So this is breaking off the colder air in these two locations. And that, because of that, I do anticipate seeing continued, quite expansive region of snow cover. The map over there on the left, if you take a look at it here, that's where we currently have snow cover in the northern hemisphere. And when we compare it to normal, you can see these are where we have the positive anomaly. So quite a bit of snow getting pretty far away from the North Pole here toward the southerly latitudes. And that is helping to increase the likelihood of the polar vortex being disrupted into the future. So that's a vote for keeping keeping it cool. But if you take a look at this, are we at some sort of turning point with our global patterns? Well, we finally gotten the MJO to bust out here in phase 5 and then really get on the move in that kind of counterclockwise movement around this diagram. And with the Indian Ocean dipole reaching a peak, but it has since decreased, we've started to see a bit of a change in behavior in the Pacific Ocean winds. And I'm not going to go into detail this because I talked about it yesterday in the long-range forecast, but those subtle shifts are also affecting what's going on here in the Central Pacific with ocean temperatures and wind patterns. It is affecting also what we see here in the strength of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. That's that warm water in this area. And overall, with this kind of waning now of temperatures in the Central Pacific, we're looking at some sort of a pattern change as we finish the month of November and get into the beginning of December. And where that may play itself out first is not just going to be North America, but also South America. And we've seen here that over the last couple of days, the forecast for precipitation for much of Brazil's major growing regions looks to be very wet. So Mato Grosso do Sul getting right here into Mato Grosso into Mato Grosso do Sul, even coming into like Paraná, wetter than average conditions in the near term. Still keeping it dry over here like in Bahia, Goiás, Minas Gerais, parts of the Tocantins, and also in that same area, very, very hot for this time of year. So what's cooling it down in here is cloud cover and precipitation. And given that Brazil is about 50% planted with their soybeans, this precipitation is critical for getting the soybeans to germinate. So I think what I'll do is I'll wrap it up right here with this discussion on South America. Hope you all have a great end to your week. We'll talk to you again tomorrow on Friday. And I look forward to giving you new forecast updates all week next week. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.